All right, welcome back. We are game 3004 in the winter 2021 semester, and it's mobile game development 2. It's week 3, part 4 of our broadcast. We just finished bringing in a tile that we created, very simple one, from Blender into Unity. We brought the blend file in. So this is what we've got. We've got two tiles, tile 1 and tile 2. This is one that I did earlier, and then one I made with you guys. It doesn't matter. You can make your own. You can make more. The more you make, the more variation there's going to be. I made them very flat. You can also make tiles that have, kind of, higher areas. Right now, they're all the same level. It doesn't really matter. One thing we've done is we've brought in a blend file. Just to note, you can bring in other types of files as well. A FPS is very common. And again, if you made this in Maya instead of Blender, then it would be oriented in the same way as Unity. But this is a great workflow. All right, so now what we want to do in this video is make a little simple character controller. And for this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide these tiles that I have here. But first, what I want to do is I want to make all these tiles have a ground layer. So I'm going to do that on the prefabs. So in the prefabs, what I want to do is I want to make a new layer, and I want to call this layer ground. And this is going to be very similar to what we've seen in the past. I want tile 1 to be ground, and I also want tile 2 to be ground. Right, so this is on the ground layer. Cool. Let's just make another containing object. So we'll say right-click, and I'll make a new containing object. We'll create an empty object, and we'll call this tiles. And we'll just drag and drop all of these to hide them inside the tile's empty object. Because we're not going to really move these today or do anything else with them, right? And then what I can do is, while I'm making my character controller, I want to hide the tiles. And then let's just add a simple plane in Unity. So that it'll make it easier for us to do that, less interference from the tiles. And we'll bring them back after. So I'm going to 3D object, make a plane. And let's expand this plane to make it the same approximate size. So again, and let's also reset it. So I'll say where it's going to be is in the middle of the screen. And let's position the scale so that it's something like, we had like two tiles that were 32 by 32, which is 64 by 64. So something that is at least this big. Let's say. Pretty big, right? So it's pretty big. It's a pretty big area to play with, and maybe that's too big. It's probably like more like 32 by 32 is probably more accurate. Was where our tiles were like more like this. Yeah. All right, so cool. So this is our area we're going to play with. But what I want to do for this plane, it's temporary. We're going to get rid of it. I want to make a character controller now, right? I just wanted to make the plane so it's easy for us to see the controller instead of having all those other objects in the scene. All right. Let's make a brand new empty object. So create empty. That's where we're going to start. We're going to call this the player. Here's the player. And what I want to do immediately is add the character controller in it. And let's reset the player to the center. And if I zoom in, you can see that, yeah, these things are massive, this tile. You can see that the character has a little and what looks like a capsule collider built in. So all character controllers have this. Again, I'm using the standard character controller here in Unity. All right. Again, there's nothing around, just this little surface right now on this. What I want to do is I want to add a body. So let's add a body so we can visualize what this object looks like, right? So again, I'm going to go and add a 3D object to the player. We're going to make it so it's a cylinder, let's say. You could add a capsule as well. It doesn't really matter. Something that makes sense. I'm just going to use a cylinder for now. And just so we can visualize the cylinder, I'm going to go into materials and make a brand new material. Let's make a brand new material. We're going to call this green, the green material, right? And we're going to change the color here in albedo. Some people say albedo. We're going to change it to green. So we're going to go over here to this color wheel, change it to green, and make sure that all these other values are 0 except for green and the alpha transparency value. Now that we have green, let's drag and drop green onto our little object. So we're going to do this. Notice that the plane temporarily took on the green material while we're moving it onto the object. Cool. So we can see the object clearly. There it is. Right? It's kind of floating above the ground. Right, there it is. I'll kind of give you to in a different angle, if you will. That's good. And what I want to do is I want to take the main camera now and bring it into the object, into my plane, my player. So main camera into the player. But the main camera has been offset with like -10 and -2 or something. Let's reset it. So we reset the main camera so it's inside the player. Like so. And I want to take the main camera and move it up so that it hovers above, just above the object, just above it. And I want to move it so it's at 1. So move it exactly at 1. So just above the top of the player's head, if you will. And there's the main camera. Again, I'm just going to navigate so you can see it from the side. Again, we can do that here as well with the little gizmo. We're seeing the camera from the side now. Excellent. So that's where the main camera is. The cylinder, let's call that the body. The main camera, we can call this the player camera. As long as this tag is the main camera, we're okay. Let's leave it like that. The player also, I want to add to the player something called a ground check. So again, I'm going to add a new empty object. We're going to call this ground check. So I'm going to use some raycasting for that. And I'm just going to drag the ground check to the bottom. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm here so you can see the bottom. The bottom of the object. So again, I'm just going to bring it right here so you can see it. It should be at -1, to be exact. -1. So 1 is where the camera is, -1 is where this is. And if I was to take this into orthographic mode, as an example, really quickly, you can see that it's probably right at the bottom. The reason why it's so far away is because of the plane. It's funny. There we go. All right, so player, body, player, camera, ground check. This is kind of the way we're doing it. And what I want to do in prep, and then I'll ask you if you're with me, is in my scripts, I want to make 2 scripts, one called player behavior and the other one called camera controller. Let's do that. So again, create a new C# script called player behavior. And I want to make a new C# script called camera controller. And I'm getting a weird reference error. I'm going to clear that. I don't know why I'm getting that. Camera controller and player behavior. All right, now is the time I ask, are you with me? Are you with me? Check mark if you're with me. X if somehow you're not. I got Russell, Nate, I got Michael. If you're a Unity person, this should be pretty straightforward to you. We've done it many times. This is like a review for you guys. All right, I'm going to clear that. Thank you for that feedback, people who are watching. All right, so now that I've got my object starting to set up, I want to connect my camera controller to my camera. And I want to connect my to my player, kind of like the parent object. I want to take my player behavior and connect it to that. Okay, so player behavior goes to my parent object. Camera controller goes to my player camera. Let's also tag the player object as a player. So we know that there's anything that's special that comes out of the player. We know that's a very common tag. Let's just use that. Let's save the scene, and we'll also save the project. And this is good. This is a good start. What I want to do first is let's think about what we want to do. I want to make a camera controller that allows me to use first-person controls with a mouse to move the camera up and down, left and right. When I move the camera left and right, I want the player to rotate to the left and to the right. That's what I want it to do. So let's go into the camera controller first. Again, this is a common script that I've been using for a while. Not my script. I didn't develop it at the beginning, but I think it's pretty effective in terms of what it does. So let's go into it and see how this goes. So again, I'm going to go into the top here in camera controller and type in public float. And I want to call this sensitivity. So sensitivity. And let's use a sensitivity of about 1000.0f. You're going to say like 1000. Yeah, leave it as 1000 for now. I also want a public transform when this thing updates. Sorry, it's doing its little resharp or C++, resharp or C# dance. I'm going to call this player body, right? So those are the two public properties. And I also want a private X rotation. So rotation across the X axis, which is going to be separate than, which is going to be a float type, of course, which is going to be separate than the rotation property that's attached to the transform. So I can keep track of this. I'm also going to, when I run this code, I want to lock my cursor, just like we normally see in other, mouse look kind of scripts. So I'll say cursor dot lock state, and that's going to equal to cursor lock state. You see I have options here for locked. That's the one I want it to select. So by default, my cursor lock state when I start this script is locked. So it just it makes my cursor disappear. There's some other optimizations we can make as well. So we're going to say, here's our mouse X. Our mouse X is going to get input get access from the mouse X input manager multiplied by my sensitivity, and then also multiplied by time dot delta time for scaling. All right, so that way we can't spam the mouse. All right. Again, this is optional. What we can also do is do something else here instead of reducing, because what time dot delta time does is it reduces the value, because input.getAccess gives us a value between -1 and 1, and then sensitivity bumps that value up of 1000, then delta time reduces it back down to by 0.1.016, right? Because that's usually the time between ticks, if you will. All right, so let's copy this and we'll put this back in here, and we'll change this to mouse Y, and this will be mouse Y. So we have mouse X and Y. We're getting input and we're storing it in mouse X and Y. Then what I can do is, this is where the X rotation comes into play. X rotation is something that's going to be preserved outside of the update loop, right? So I can say that mouse X rotation minus equals to mouse Y. Minus equals because if you try plus equals, it kind of shows you the reverse of what you're normally used to in terms of the way mouse look works. And then X rotation, we want to clamp it. So when I get my clamping mechanism to clamp the X rotation altogether to between -90 and 90 is where I want it to go. So that kind of makes it so that this, your camera doesn't flip over when you're going up or around. And then finally, I want to change my transform dot local rotation. So local rotation, and it's got to be a Quaternion. We're in 3D now, so we're going to use a Quaternion Euler, and we're going to pump in the X rotation value, and then 0, 0 on the Y and Z axis. So all we care about right now when we rotate is just rotating around from an X perspective. So what this is up and down, right? Because if I'm rotating around X, that's looking up and down. The next thing is I want to think about rotating around, kind of left and right. And the way to do that is to rotate around the Y-axis. And to do that, we're going to say player body, hey player body, let's rotate, right? And we're going to rotate across a vector 3.up. That's the axis we're going to rotate around, multiplied by mouse X. And that should give us everything we need for our simple mouse look. Okay, for a first-person perspective camera. Now, one thing we're missing when we bring this back into Unity, first of all, are you with me? Do you need me to pause here while you're copying the script? because I'm talking and you're watching, and I want to make sure you guys got it. Are you good? Check mark if you guys are with me, X if you need me to wait, or maybe you want to say go slower, go faster. Why are we using mouse X for up and down rotation? Mouse X is the axis of rotation, Michael. That's what we're using it for. All right, so whereas, sorry, mouse X is the direction we're moving our mouse. X rotation is where we're rotating around this X axis. So X axis is using mouse Y, right? So when we go up and down, we're rotating around the X axis. And what we can do is, if you don't like this name, we can say X axis rotation is what this really is. So if I want to refactor rename to make sense of this, this is X axis rotation, which is what this is. X axis rotation. When we rotate around the X axis, then what we're doing is we're looking up and down. So, and we can further do that by doing some comments. So look up and down. That's what this does. And this part is together because we need to use a Quaternion Euler for that. And this one is look left and right and rotate around the y-axis, right? Because that's what this is. Vector 3 up is the axis of rotation, which is the y-axis. All right, so now that we've got this, the only thing that's left to do is let's bring this into Unity and see how we have to modify some stuff. So if I go to the player camera, and if I look over here, there's no connection to the player body. Let's grab the player, main player parent, and drag and drop it in there. And that's what we want to do. And then press save. So to test this, we should be able to run it now, and we should be able to move the mouse in its locked form up and down, and then left and right. We can't tell that it's moving left and right, but it is. And to facilitate this just in the plane of where we're looking, let's put a simple cube just to give us a sense of that we're moving around, right? So let's add a cube. So create 3D object. We're going to get rid of these again later on. We're going to reset it. There it is, and just move it kind of forward and maybe a little bit up so we can just see it in our view. So if I run it now, then we should be able to see when we move around, we should be able to see that cube if we're rotating. There it is, right? Kind of proving that we can rotate around left and right. And it starts facing ground because unfortunately that is when we start we haven't modified the script yet to from an optimization perspective. All I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, let's start by rotating our mouse. But because a lot of times my mouse is way up here, right, which is here, it's looking at it globally, right? So I'm up here, and so what's happening when I do this, I'm actually looking up in the sky, or I'm down here, which means I'm looking on the ground, however I put my mouse, position my mouse in the first place, right? So that's what it does. So again, this is where it needs a little bit of help, and we're going to optimize later. All right, let's just get right into the cube, into our little object. And again, if you press F for frame select mode, you'll get right close to where you're supposed to be. Awesome. All right, and we have that little cube just for an orientation perspective. And we're going to get rid of the cube and the plane later. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to add or modify the player behavior script. So we've done the first script, and let's modify player behavior. So player behavior is a little bit more involved. Okay, or a lot more involved is probably better to say. Let's talk about this a little bit. Right. So one is we want some kind of ground check. Right. That's going to come on the bottom. We're going to use some raycasting to do this. Okay. So let's do this first. Let's start setting up our script. And the first thing I want to do is talk about some sections. So there's going to be a movement properties that we're going to use. We're also going to have some ground check properties, which we're going to use here. So things like, am I grounded, that kind of stuff. Okay. So for movement properties, let's use a header, and we're going to say that it's going to be called movement for the player. And for movement, we want a public float max speed. And we want to set the max speed, let's say to 10 for now. And we also want the public float gravity. Let's call it, we're going to control our gravity as well. And we're going to set our gravity to something large, like -30, not negative 9.8. Why? Because when I notice for me personally, when I use something like negative 9.8, that there's a bit of a float, and I want my character to snap down to the ground a lot faster. One thing to note is I cannot use an additional rigid body on top of my character controller because it already has a rigid body in it. So all I'm doing is I'm going to adjust the velocity manually. Okay. I also want to set up my jump height. So this is my jump height. Okay, my jump height is here. And my jump height is not going to be 30. It's going to be 3 meters. That's where I want it to be. And then what I want to do, just like gravity is something that's going to pull me down, my velocity, I'm going to make a public velocity, so vector 3, where I'm going to keep track of my velocity separately from my rigid body. Again, I don't have access to my rigid body the same way, so I'm going to use velocity instead. From a ground check properties perspective, I'm going to do my public transform, which is going to be, I'm going to get reference to the ground check that I created, that little empty object that's at the bottom of my character. And I'm also going to get a public float that is the ground radius, is what I want to call it, which is 0.5 f, approximately half a unit, right? We're also going to do a public layer mask, right, which we've done before last semester. We're going to call this the ground mask. And this is the thing that we're going to be able to collide with our raycast. Okay. So ground check, ground radius, and ground mask. Okay. And the last thing is a Boolean that is going to show us a public Boolean that is grounded. So we're going to have that is grounded check. And then we're going to wrap this inside of a header. So we're going to say header, and this is kind of ground check. So that's what it is. Am I grounded? Am I not grounded? That's what this part is. Okay, so movement and ground check. All right, before we move on, what I want to do is, but there's actually one more thing we need, sorry. The one more thing we need is access to the, and we'll make another header for this, is the character controller. So the character controller itself is that little component, and I want to get access to it. I want to call it a public character controller. We're just going to call it controller. Okay. All right, so let's do some of the drag and drops that I have to do, when I kind of bring it into Unity. So I'm going to go to my player, and underneath that I have what looks like this. I have my movement and my ground check now, and I want to choose my ground mask as the ground that I made earlier, the ground layer. My transform from a ground check is drag and drop. And because my character controller is right here, I'm going to get it dynamically. So I'm going to go back to my start, and I'm going to say that controller is equal to get component character controller. So we can get that dynamically. It's inside the same object. So it's not so difficult to get. And it's not available now, but if I go back to runtime, so it's not going to show it now. But if I go into runtime, then when I press play, it's going to show my player character controller right there, which is just this object right here. All right, great. So that is all of my, properties that I need in order for me to move and jump. For jumping, we're not going to use a force necessarily. We're going to calculate, we're going to use a little physics equation to calculate the desired jump height. That's what this is, right? That's how high I want to jump. If I move this to 5 or 10, I'll jump exactly 5 or 10. That's what I'm going to do. Okay. And let's scroll down, and this is where the fun happens. But before that, I want to include that little on Gizmos trick we did last semester. So on draw gizmos. What I want to do with this is I want to say gizmos.color is equal to color.white. Okay, color.white. And then I want to say gizmos dot draw wire sphere, and I want to do a ground check dot position and a ground radius. So that's going to kind of make my sphere appear. Got some questions on Discord I want to make sure I answer. Just 1 sec. Okay, and I got another one. Okay, not too crazy. I'm good. So I just want to make sure I answer the people on Discord as well. I got Discord, I got YouTube over here, and I've got the chat from Zoom. So lots of stuff going on all at the same time. All right, so now that I've got this, let's see what this looks like in Unity. So if I take it back to Unity, you can see now that I'm going to show a little sphere at the bottom of my object, and this is what's going to detect ground for me, this little piece right here. All right, great. So, and I'm just visualizing here with OnDraw Gizmos. You can draw whatever you want, and in 3D, it really helps be able to visualize even things like line of sight, all those kind of things. I want to be able to visualize with my gizmos, and I might as well take advantage of them now because they're part of Unity. All right, so this is where the fun happens. So the first thing is I want to check to see if I'm grounded. So is grounded, we're going to use that physics raycast stuff. So physics, but instead of physics raycast, we're going to use the check sphere actually, which is kind of cool. So check sphere, we're going to start with a ground check dot position and a ground radius, and then we're going to use the ground mask. So this right here is basically going to check to see if from the ground check position around a certain radius, do I hit ground? If the answer is yes, then I'm grounded. If not, then I'm not grounded. So pretty straightforward stuff, and it's going to happen every update. Again, if I go back to Unity on the Unity side, and if I run it now, and we're going to bring it into the scene mode for a second. So if I take it here, you see that I'm not grounded, but if I take my object and I bring it closer to the ground, and if I just, as I approach the ground, you can see that what I want to see is that I'm grounded, and the reason why it's not happening is because my plane isn't a ground. I didn't make the plane the ground. Let's do that. So change this to ground. Try again. So again, going back to my scene as an example, and I want to choose my player and then move my player to the ground. And as I do that, and I touch the player down there, you can see that the check mark here on the right turns on, right? Which means it's grounded as soon as the sphere touches. What it's going to do is going to touch it, and then it's going to land on the ground because I'm going to move it down, across the sphere. It's going to kind of go down here like this. But first, it's going to ground like this. All right, so that is grounded working, which is the first piece. Okay, I'm going to take a pause, and are you with me? Are you getting weird results? Are you getting different results than me? Russell says he's good. Michael says he's good. I got Nate. Hey, Nate, you're with me now. Cool. You're probably always with me, but you just didn't want to check mark. All right, cool. Thank you for that feedback. Let's move to the next level. So now that I'm grounded, I want to be able to move, right? So let's check to see first. Let's do a check. Well, we're going to do a little bit of a hack. We're going to say if is grounded, and we're going to say if my velocity dot y is less than 0. So if I'm not moving at all, or if it's negative, I want to actually have my velocity dot y equal to negative 2. And what this is going to do is going to like put me solidly on the ground. That's what this is going to do. Okay. It's a bit of a hack. So it's like a ground hack, if you will. Float x, we're going to kind of have our x and y inputs. So input dot get axis, and then we're going to say horizontal. This is going to get my A and D inputs when I use my A and D keys to move, or right and left arrows. Later on, we're going to add touch controls to this. We're also going to have on the, because we're on the XZ plane here, the Z is going to be input.getAxis vertical. All right, so this is a little different than what we've done before. So we have X and Z. These two are going to get input again from across the X axis and across the Z axis. Right. You can also say this is like, right and left. The X axis. We can kind of call these X axis and Z axis as well. I want to make a new vector 3, temporary vector 3 called move. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the transform.right. So wherever we're looking to the right, multiplied by whatever X value we get. So the X input, right and left input, which is an interesting way of doing it, plus the transform.forward multiplied by Z. So what this is going to do is it's going to move me, right? It's going to kind of create, right is, if you know what that is, it's X is positive, and then Y is 0 and Z is 0. So that's what this is. So this is the first thing. So multiplied by the X and Y coordinates, right? And then transform forward is forward and back multiplied by the Z coordinates. So in other words, is it positive? I'm going, if I press the W key, or if I press the S key, it's going to be multiplied and move the other way. And then I add these two vectors together, and this is on the X axis, on the Z axis, and then I get a move vector, but not on the Y axis. This does not include the Y axis at all. And this is a quick way of doing both at the same time. Cool. And then what I want to do is finally I want to access my controller. So I can say that, hey, controller, that's that character controller thing I was talking about before, which controls my my movement, and it adds a rigid body. And remember that it's going to affect us when it comes to moving it around. I'm going to add my move. That's my move vector 3 object. And I want to multiply it by my max speed, right? And then multiply by time.delta time, which is going to scale it down again. And that should enable us to move. So this is movement. Okay, that's what this is. And what we could do later on is we can take this movement and put it inside of a function, because that's a quick way of moving it. We can separate it from jumping, and we can separate it from applying gravity, right? Because that's what this is. But again, we're just making it work first. That's my motto. And then later on, we can refactor. So let's try it. So if we go back, and if we just run it, then if we're grounded, right, then we should be able to, sorry, so I'm going to lock my cursor and we'll fix that problem. We should be able to move forward as an example now and move back. So again, here is moving forward, moving across and down, back, left, and right. But again, what we're doing is we're floaty. We're floaty because we haven't really fixed that problem. We're not, we haven't kind of added gravity in any way. We're just moving around. All right, let's escape from that and stop and go back to our player behavior again. All right, so far so good. Movement. Let's get into the next part. So the next part is we want to apply gravity. And the other part we want to do is jumping. So movement, jumping, and apply gravity. We'll do gravity first, because we can't jump unless we're on the ground. So let's do that next. So what we're going to say is we're going to use velocity for this. So velocity.y is plus equal to gravity. Gravity is minus 30, right? Multiplied by time.delta time. So this is going to be our way of basically making us fall all the time, right? And then we can't move ourselves at all unless we use the controller.move. That's how strict the controller is for us. We can't modify our position or anything unless we use controller.move. So let's do that. So we'll say controller. We can also turn the controller off, which I'm going to show you how to do later. So controller move, and we can say that velocity, this is the velocity vector, right, multiplied by time.delta time. So this is our gravity taking hold. And let's see how this works. So going back to Unity, And if I press play, then let me just go to the scene here so you can see it. And you can see that my player is on the ground with a little bit of a hover. There's a little bit of a gap, if you will. And that's okay. Yes, we are, because it's like doing once we include it, it's like we're saying we're multiplying times time, which is t squared, and when we calculate our acceleration due to gravity, we're actually incorporating that in one when we do that. Okay, so that's good. We are double counting, and let's go back to this. Here we are. So we've got gravity down. Let us do jumping, and then we're done for the character controller. So again, if inputs dot get button, we'll use get button down instead of get axis, jump, and we're going to say at the same time, and we're also is grounded. If is grounded is true, then what we want to do is we want to say that velocity dot y, as an example, is equal to math f, and this is that physics equation I was talking about, square root our jump target, that's our jump, how high we want to jump, multiplied by -2, and then multiplied by gravity. And that -2 times gravity is 2g. Remember that equation where we calculated the height of a parabola? That's kind of what we're doing here when we're using this equation, square root of the height of the parabola, to kind of figure out the h, the small h, for the top of the, of the jump. And instead of using force. All right, so let's try that out and see how that works. And we should see, if everything goes well, we should be able to jump 3 meters high every single time. Let's go back to Unity and do that. So going back to Unity, again, let's look up and we'll look around to see our little cube for an orientation perspective. We'll move forward towards it and we'll jump. And you can see now we can jump as we normally would toward the cube. Okay, this is a great place to get rid of this ugly plane and the ugly cube. Let's just delete them. And let's put back our tiles. We'll turn these tiles back on for us and see where we're at with our tiles. So tiles, I want to turn these all on again. Here we are. And what we want to do is we want to move our character, our player, somewhere where it's not being, let's move it over here actually, somewhere. So it starts off, somewhere over here, looking at a wall. Sure. And when we run it, we can see that here it is. We're at the edge of a tile. And now we can move through the maze as an example. Again, it's a little janky. It's not perfect, especially if it's not cursor locked all the time. We're going to fix that problem. But for now, it's like what it is. Now, I can't necessarily, so 3 is pretty good. I can move, jump over the maze if I want to as well. All right, so that's kind of something I can do. And I may not want that to happen. So I can adjust the jump height. So I can say, you know what, let's make the jump height 2. And we can try it in real time. So if I jump, I should just be able to not be able to make it. We can see the top of the maze, but maybe I want 2 to be my jump height. All right, so that is pretty good. And we can see that 2 or something like, if we want the character to go on top of the maze, that's okay. But if we don't, then a jump height of 2 is just fine. So we can modify this value to 2, not 32. 32 would be like crazy, really high. We can try that too if you really want to. In real time, we can say, okay, I want a jump height of 10. And let's see how that works. So if I go here and jump, you can see that it's going to go 10, right? So you can do whatever you like. And sometimes you might want to have special effects that makes you go 10 or something like that, like maybe some kind of backpack or a special ability. But this is the jump height target. That's what this is, more than anything else. All right, cool. I know we're running out of time and we got about 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a death plane really quickly and the death plane script. So first of all, what I want is a spawn point for the player. I'm going to make a new spawn point. So in here, I'm making a new empty object that's inside the player object. We're going to call it spawn point. And then I'm going to pull the spawn point out in here. And what it does is it takes the global values when I do that. Wherever the player currently is where the spawn point is going to be. So I need that. Now let's make a death plane. So again, a death plane, I want to just make a new, let's make a 3D object cube. We will center the cube in the middle of the scene, if you will. And then what we'll do is we'll look at it from the side, we'll pull it down, let's say somewhere like -20, so pretty low. I'm also going to make a quick material for it. I know I'm going a little fast, guys, but I'm doing this because I want to make sure we have everything in your video. So create a new material, and let's call this material red. We'll change the color to red. And again, we'll make sure that the RGB values are 25500-255. And we'll apply the red color to the cube, right way down there. And now what I want to do with the cube is I want to make it pretty large, like a large death plane. All right, so the scale on the x-axis will be something like we had before. Let's make it something like 100, or even more, 500, something really large. And on the z-axis, again, is like 500, so really large. There's a death plane. And it'll sit way underneath the our little structure. Now this red is for debug purposes only, right? And what we want to do is turn off the mesh renderer. So it's there, we have the collider, but the mesh renderer can be turned on and off when we need to see it, okay? For now, we don't need to see it. And we rename this thing death plane. So player, spawn point, death plane. Cool. I want to add a little script like we've done before. So scripts. I want to make a new script called death plane controller. And in the death plane controller, let's double click, which is going to bring up our little script. We don't need any of this. All we need is a void on trigger enter. And we want, instead of a collision, we want a collider other. And what this does is we're saying that if a trigger collider collides with this one, then we want to make it go back. We also need a transform. So public transform, which is the spawn point. Okay, we need that as well. So we're going to say that if other dot compare tag is player, right? Then what I want to do is I want to say that I want to get the player's behavior. I want to get access to the player behavior because I need to turn off my my controller. So I'm going to say that var player is equal to other dot game object dot get components, and it's the character controller or the player behavior. Let's get the player behavior. Here's my player behavior. I know it's kind of long, but then what I want to say is when I'm connecting with the target, I want to say the player dot the controller I want enabled to be false. So what this does is it disables the controller that controls my character. Otherwise, I will not ever be able to move my character in where I like to the spawn point, not the same way. Then I want to say that my player dot transform dot position is equal to the spawn point dot position, and that'll move my player right to the spawn point. And then I want to turn this back on again so I can move again. But while I'm transitioning, I can't move. And that is the script that you need for the player to be detected and to be, when it hits the death plane, and to go back to the spawn point again, which is very similar to what we did last time, last semester. Okay, we're almost done with this. We need a couple of things to make this work in the death plane. One is on the death plane itself, we need to get a reference. First of all, we need to drag and drop the death plane controller, first thing. And the next thing is we need to get a reference to the spawn point. So here's the spawn point. And then we need to make this a trigger collider. And that's it. That should do everything you need to do for the, for the death plane to work. So trigger collider, add the death plane controller script, drag and drop the spawn point. And then if we test it, then let's just lock the cursor again. Again, we'll fix that problem another day. If we test it and if I fall off the plane, then we should get back on the plane again. So even if I back up, let's say I fall off the plane, then we're back on the plane again. Right? Pretty good. Fall off the plane, and I'm back on the plane again. Right? So that is, kind of like resetting us to the spawn point. All right, and sometimes we want to be more dramatic than this. So because we've set the spawn point where we're looking at a wall, and sometimes what we do in some games is we get to the spawn point. We don't want it to start there, but rather we want it to start like way up here somewhere so we can see ourselves falling again. And that's not a bad thing to do if you die for the first time. So again, let's suppose I die for the first time. So I kind of go into space and I die. Then you can see myself falling down into the area there. Okay. All right, that's it. We've covered pretty much everything we need for today. We've got the, just a recap for this video, we made a character controller that allows us to move around the scene, which is our own. We still got some adjustments to make, and Michael, you pointed it out. We're starting to look kind of down, and we want to fix that problem. So when we start the scene, we are oriented, our camera is oriented straight, is what we want, not down. So we kind of reset the camera. That's what we need to do one time. That's the one thing we haven't had a chance to code. And then once our camera is looking straight, then it's going to take wherever the we're gonna adjust it to where the where my mouse is going to move. Okay. All right. So that is the thing that we're going to do today. We're going to file, save project, and we're going to put this up on GitHub for you guys to have. Because we're going to build on this project week over week. We're not going to do all this work like we did today in the future, not as much. So we're going to kind of close off Unity. And one thing to note also when we do this, and we've done this before several times with Unity in the past, right? Just bring up, close all my little Visual Studios for now, is when we have a command prompt, and let's say I want to go into Game 3004, W2021, and it's week 3B is where we want to go. Did I not make it week 3B? Don't know why I did that, but that's fine. We can always change this in our desktop. That's weird that I did that, but hey, mistakes are made sometimes, and that's okay. We can adjust for those mistakes. Just modifying it on my operating system right now. Sorry, guys. And let's do the directory again. There we go. So that we can space up a couple places and go in there. What I want is to set up my GitHub repo. But remember, and I'm sorry I'm running over time, but remember that we need a Git Ignore file, and we can find one online because we didn't necessarily make one right now. We're not using Git Kraken or anything else to do it. We're just doing everything by hand. So let's just download a Git Ignore file for Unity. So we'll say Unity .git ignore file, and you can see we're going to find one very quickly. The first link will give me the Git Ignore file that I want, literally that fast. So I'm going to copy everything in here, the whole Git Ignore file, and I'm going to go to the terminal and just put the terms in touch. Touch means create .git ignore. And what I want to do in my operating system off screen here is I'm going to go into the Git Ignore file and double click it, which is going to bring up my default editor for anything that's .git ignore, which is my Visual Studio Code. You can also use an editor like Notepad. And I'm going to copy and paste my Git Ignore file in here, which is going to save me the trouble of putting the library file and the build and all this kind of stuff. Save. Now that I get a Git Ignore file really quickly, I can just put it up. So I can say git init, git add dot, git commit -m. initial commit. Again, assumption that you know Git commands. If you don't, you can use a tool like we talked about before, which is Gitkraken or Source Tree or something like that. Now I need some kind of repository online. Let's make that. So we're going to say go to github.com, and we're going to go to George Brown College, and we're going to go out to here, and we're going to make a new repository called GAME3004 in the winter 2021 semester. And it's going to be week 3B is the one we've been working on. We'll make it public for everyone online, and then we'll press enter to make that repository. We're going to get some steering directions on how to put this up online. We're going to grab these the last three lines of code, go back here and right click, and then press enter, and it's going to put everything up on GitHub for us. Now you don't have to do it that way. Again, you can use a tool, but this is a way quicker way of doing it for me. And if I refresh, you can see that there is your GitHub repo. Let's just add a README file that says that this is GAME3001 week 3B. So this is lab 1 for GAME3004. Commit new file. And then locally, what I can do to have that, I can just say git pull. And that'll pull that README file down. And we're good. So guys, that's it for today. Any questions at all before we end for the day? Any questions at all? I know we went through a lot, but we covered all the things that we wanted to do today. We covered, made a 3D tile in Blender. We brought the 3D tile in Unity. We adjusted the 3D tile in Unity to make sure it worked properly. And then from there, we added a character controller. And we're able to do stuff with our character controller, right? Which is jump, move, and stuff. We still got some adjustments to make. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So any questions at all before we go for the day? Are the labs still being handled for bonus marks? Not today, because this is the first one, Phoenix, but the next one and the next one, we're going to do that. Because what I want to do is I want to get everyone started with some kind of project. So I find that because we did Blender today for the first time, maybe people didn't follow along. I don't want to force people to do that just for today. And especially since you got your first playable release that's due coming up next week, I wanted to give you a little bit of extra time. So after this week, we'll do that. Okay? If that makes sense. All right, other than that, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and being present and being participatory. I'll see you guys next week. I'll stick around for any questions that people have here locally. Thank you so much for the people watching online too. Take care.